I'd just like to ask each of the panel, and maybe I could start with Florence from the CNIL's perspective. What's been your experience of GPEN? Have there been any obstacles? How has it worked or not worked for you?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Nick, for this question. In fact, it's a very important question in the sense that cooperation today, international cooperation with our counterpart, is absolutely fundamental, essential. I mean, it's unavoidable, and it's necessary. It's necessary because there is a globalization of actors, globalization of activities, commercial activities, globalization of data flows. And so there is also an expectation from our citizens that we manage to cooperate internationally in order to protect them when their data are not necessarily on European or even French soil. So there is absolutely a need to promote this cooperation, and in that sense, we welcome very much the GPEN initiative that help us to develop a strong collaboration on practical case. We participated in the 3 last sweep days, so 2013, 14, and 15. It was a very interesting, very rich experience, I would say, in terms of content, but also in terms of process. In terms of content, because we managed, in fact, with those sweep days, it was a very concentrated effort. One day, just, with 16 people from the CNIL. At the CNIL level, it was 16 people from the enforcement team, IT, lawyers working together, in the same room, working together in order to do the sweep days. And I think for the child privacy, it was like more than 100 websites checked in one day. So it's a lot of intensive work. But it was very interesting, to see the problems, issues around information, consent, data retention. So a very concrete issue of enforcement, of compliance, and to share that with our counterparts. But it's also, in terms of process, and I think that's maybe the most important, the most interesting part, is that it's necessary that also we are building like common tools in order to better enforce, to improve our cooperation, like questionnaire, like dashboard, like roadmap. So we have also to talk about process, and be better structured on that. In terms of obstacle, I don't know if I would say that I would present this in a negative way and more in a positive manner. I think it's a challenge. It's a challenge because we are not necessarily organized in the same way in different regions of the world, and we have seen it also in Europe as well. So we need to get to know each other, and we have done it. It was also an interesting experience with APEC when we developed this CBPR, BCR referential, not on the enforcement side, but on the compliance side, on the accountability side, and it was also a good case study, in order to exchange with different regulators across the globe on, for example, definition of personal data, what we mean by accountability. So it was an interesting, anyway, an interesting exchange of views. So that's for sure a necessity to talk to each other. But again, we are not exactly composed or structured, organized in the same manner. There is the GPEN, there is Data Protection Authority, there are also privacy enforcement authorities that do not have necessarily the same powers. And there is also the problem of the rules. We don't have the same laws and the same baseline across the globe. That's also make an interesting discussion because it's very rich. We can also exchange on experience and on the way there is maybe principle that can be useful for other part of the world, and exchange on that. Accountability, I think, is a great example on that. Privacy by design with the Canadian colleagues that are here in the room. So it's also interesting to share on best practice and how we can benefit from each other experience. So that was interesting. And also we have to learn, by practicing and see how we can converge as much as possible on principles, rules, but also on the way we interpret the rules. We don't necessarily have the same interpretation, and so we don't have necessarily, naturally, the same conclusion about interpretation. But I would say that's something that for sure we will improve, but the most important thing is that we talk to each other, we work together, we are part of the same community, and we manage to exchange on best practice and how we can work together. And Christopher was talking about goals, the aim. Yeah. Why are we here? And I guess that we are all, as Data Protection Authority, here to protect our citizens, and we will be efficient if we do it together at international level, because that's now the new society. Thank you.
Great. So it's about sort of connectedness. It's not global data police. It's sharing best practice. It's sharing information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the GPEN itself, the Global Privacy Enforcement Network, is growing by leaps and bounds. In 2010, there were, I think, 13 privacy enforcement authorities, which is sort of the collective for DPAs and something less than DPAs. And the last time I looked, 2014, it was up to 53, covering 39 jurisdictions. 15 privacy enforcement authorities have joined in 2014. So it's growing like topsy. And I think it's absolutely right. It's about cooperation. Not setting up some sort of world government, as if that was a likely prospect, but I think there's been some real achievements. For example, the nightmare webcam experience that Julie was referring to, the INSACAM thing. I mean, in the end, we got it closed down because of effective cooperation between members of GPEN. It was the Canadians, the FTC was absolutely key, the ICO, Australians, people in Macau, I forget all the people who were involved, but the network was there to pull the information together. Other successes, we've established now through the International Conference an annual enforcement cooperation meeting, and what tends to happen is that there's a GPEN meeting in parallel. We met in Ottawa at the beginning of June, very good GPEN session on the first day, and the same thing will happen at the International Conference. And the idea of more international cooperation is catching on. So, the dear old Commonwealth at last has got its act together. We've got, you can have the Francophone network, and good luck to them. We've also got the something we call Common Thread, which is a Commonwealth network, and again, that's about capacity building. So there are lots of good things happening, but lots of challenges too. I think there needs to be better coordination with the International Conference, because it's not really clear what the governance arrangements are for GPEN. It's not key, but it probably needs to be sorted out. And we're very good at doing these sweeps. It's not terribly clear what happens next. I think the children's app sweep that was taking place in May, the various participants are going to report in to the private session at the International Conference, and that's how we can take things forward. So a lot of progress, a lot of good things, but a few frustrations.
And Julie, do you see these various networks that Christopher's referred to, do you see them as effectively operating in tandem, or gradually does it sort of morph into one global network? Is that a realistic or a helpful proposition?
I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. I think that it's all a little too soon to tell. We're involved in all of them. We're very involved in GPEN. We're not involved in the Francophone one. I'm sorry, Isabel. So we are not, I guess I shouldn't say we're involved in all of them, but we are involved in GPEN. We're very involved in the APEC cross-border privacy enforcement arrangement, and we're Our agency is first and foremost a law enforcement agency, and we bring cases. What are we going to do with the results of the sweeps? We're going to bring cases. I mean, that's what we do, and that's one of the reasons why, although some of the entities that we cooperated with in looking at the children's apps, talked about it, we're waiting to see what cases will be developed out of it. That's what we do, and that's what we have done with respect to past sweeps. Sweeps are great. I agree with Florence's description, which was a wonderful one. You have a bunch of people sitting in a room. We may have had more than, I don't know the exact number, it may have been more than 16, but it's very important that you've got technologists, you've got lawyers, and they're looking for certain things, and we know that our counterparts around the world are looking for them, whether it's on a day or a week or within a particular month. So I don't know that you're going to see, for instance, GPEN and the APEC cross-border group converge. They're really dealing with different issues because, of course, APEC has developed, the cross-border privacy rules. Florence has done a lot of work to try to harmonize those with the BCRs. I don't know how that. I mean, a lot of this is all very new, but I will say that we are very focused on enforcement. We're big supporters of GPEN. Some of the places where I see GPEN going, and we're working very hard at the FTC, is to develop, for instance, an alert system so that the enforcers can talk to each other in a confidential way via technology that we have already built at the FTC. We're very focused on helping that platform along. The technology that's involved with law enforcement is probably nothing like the technology that some of you here, I know Palantir's here, others, are developing for your clients. But we're getting a lot better. And at the FTC, we have a database that holds millions of complaints from all around the country, and actually internationally now as well a little bit. We get 2 million complaints a year. This is not all on privacy, I assure you, not all on privacy and data security. But a lot of it is identity theft, a lot of it is robocalling, a lot of it are other issues that I believe touch on privacy. And what we're trying to do is use the experience we have in that technological space of trying to take unstructured information and structure it in terms of helping us figure out what appropriate targets are, helping work with our partners in other jurisdictions that can tap into our database. We allow them to once we certify them. They can tap into it to help figure out who we should be targeting and why. It's a tremendous resource. So we need to get more technologically sophisticated. I know the CNIL has worked a lot on that issue. I went and visited, when was that? March? Maybe a year ago? It was a year or so ago, and I was deeply impressed with what they're doing to leverage their resources on technology. So I think something like the GPEN alert system, which hasn't yet launched but will, I hope, soon, is going to be critical to allowing us to communicate in real time about issues and to talk about cases that we're working on. It will require certification to get into the system because this is all highly confidential. To go to a question that you asked, Florence and Chris, what are some of the obstacles? I spent years and years working with the states in the United States, leading their privacy working group and working on multi-state activity, as well as dealing with legislative work. And one of the biggest obstacles that the states always had was information sharing. We had different laws that allowed a different level of disclosure of personal consumer information about complaints under our FOIA laws, if you will. And going to Stuart, what you were referring to before. I think that issue of how countries can share information about victims and what information has to be disclosed or not be disclosed and what can be kept confidential is something that needs to get worked out. And it sounds boring maybe to you all, but I spent 20 years having to deal with that issue anew on each and every case. Even though it was the same states involved, we had to always deal with it anew. Like, okay, can you share this? Can't you share this? How are you going to protect it? Let's not give it to Florida. Florida's laws are really loose. Let's not give it to whoever. The laws are too loose. I mean, it's really, but it's important. So one of the things that we're doing at the FTC is we are entering into MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding with individual countries, individual DPAs, to try to begin that conversation early so that when we do have a case that we need to work on, we can kind of move more quickly. So we have MOUs in place with the Irish DPA, with the ICO, and with the Netherlands, actually. And since you're next, you're here. I'm teasing. We'd love to do it with anyone who wants to work with us. We think the MOUs are a very effective way of indicating, okay, from DPA to DPA, leaving aside GPEN, which is great, and the Apex CPA, you know, all of that is very, very important. But an individual relationship from one DPA to another just sets a level of confidence so that we can start sharing information at a much earlier level and get the case going much more quickly.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Julie. Wilbert, what's the Dutch perspective on GPEN? Experience,
well, as you
positives,
know,
negatives?
the Dutch were one of the three initial committee members of GPEN, and I think that GPEN has contributed greatly to enhancing mutual trust and understanding, which is indispensable for good cooperation between authorities. And of course, in the future, with data crossing borders all the time, international cooperation will even be more important. And I have to say that one of the main fora in which the international data protection and privacy community meets, of course, is, again, the International Conference of Data Protection and Privacy Commissioners. But considering that we all have limited resources, and we can't be everywhere all the time and participate in everything, the idea came up, maybe I can add that, if it were not better if the global privacy enforcement network would become part of the international conference with the executive committee as the guardian. We adopted a resolution in Mauritius last year that also called for this, and I think this could turn out to be an important step in the right direction. Actually, further steps are currently being prepared and will be taken in Amsterdam. So that's more or less my view and our view on GPEN, and we are enthusiastic about GPEN. One last thing, if you allow me, it's always important to have one big one-liner, and I've been looking for the one-liner, and at your conference in Manchester, you impressed me once again with the one-liners by stating in the direction of politicians and policymakers. And Christopher Graham said, "Don't legislate what you are not prepared to fund." And I'm sure you won't mind, me of course not, my personal ad hoc variation for this afternoon. I would say, Christopher, don't investigate what you are not prepared to enforce, and together if need be. Thank you.